If you are based in the UK and would like to enjoy freshly batch roasted coffee delivered to your door, visit vitalcoffee.co.uk and use the coupon code Mr. Freaky Story to get 10% off from all products. I will leave a link in the description below. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. People I tell seem to not believe me, but I swear this is true. A little background before I get into it. I am a 29-year-old construction worker. Been doing it since high school. Metal framing and sheetrock mostly. I'm in decent shape. No history of mental disorders in my family. Only problem I have developed over the years is a mild case of tinnitus from being stubborn and refusing to wear ear protection. It comes during times of silence, like when I'm trying to sleep. So I try to keep the TV or a fan on to cancel out the ringing. Work was getting very slow where I lived, so I decided to move to Virginia. I was staying with a friend who got me a sweet gig with a local construction company on Norfolk Naval Base. It was a huge job. 5-story building, complete build-up from the ground up. Good pay. Not exactly close to where we were staying, but the drive wasn't bad as long as I made it in before morning traffic. Only thing wrong with the job was that the foreman was a complete arsehole, always talking down to us workers in that sort of passive-aggressive tone that made me want to punch him in his face. But as long as we stayed busy, he didn't bother with us for long. It was a huge job, and so he had a lot of people to bug. About 4 months into the job, I injured my right hand, sliced my middle finger on a piece of metal. It didn't hurt at all. The doctor stitching me up said it was because I was cut so deep that it had severed the nerves. The next day, I had to file an injury report and everything. My boss said he was going to put me on light duty and that I didn't have to do anything except sweep until my hand healed. I was all for it. Same pay for easy work. For the first week, things were alright, but then it started getting boring. I mean, really boring. The days dragged on, and I wondered why they wouldn't just pay me to stay home. So naturally, I started wandering around the location to kill the time. I checked out all the hallways, and there were plenty of hallways. Really long and gloomy looking when they were just grey brick all around. Some at the very top didn't even have temporary lighting and would have been pitch black if it weren't for the huge window cutouts on each end letting in sunlight. I stayed away from those hallways. They creeped me out. One day, I was feeling bored, so I decided to go walking around the 4th floor. Most of the work on that floor had been finished, and there weren't any other tradesmen doing work there at the time, so I had it all to myself. It was around that time I noticed my tinnitus was acting up worse than usual. I figured someone must have had a generator running or something, so I started moving towards the other end of the hallway. About 3/4 of the way, my ears start painfully ringing. I tried sticking my fingers in my ears and humming, which usually does the trick, but the ringing was so intense, I started feeling nauseous, and I fell over on my hands and knees. I was slapping my ears, trying to make the ringing stop. My eyes started watering at one point because I was slapping my head so hard. I got up on my knees, still covering my ears, trying to get to my feet so I could make it to the stairwell. But the ringing was so intense. Every move I made sent my head spinning. Moving slow helped, but not by much. As I turned around, I noticed someone standing at the other end of the hallway near one of the window cutouts. The sun behind him was so bright, all I could see was a silhouette. I started yelling, "Help! Help!" as loud as I could, but the guy didn't move. I thought maybe he had earplugs in and couldn't hear me, so I started moving towards him, slowly so my head wouldn't spin. As I got closer, I started noticing things I hadn't before. First, this guy was huge. Like, impossibly huge. His head was small in proportion to his body and near the top of the window. His shoulders were really wide and high, almost like he was shrugging. His arms were long, hanging down past his waist, with really long fingers on each hand. I still couldn't make out any facial features because of the bright sun behind him, but as I started realizing this person wasn't normal, I slowly backed away. He just stood there, looking right at me. I was almost to the stairs when this thing slowly cocks its head to the side, just like when a dog does when it's confused, and the ringing in my ears just goes crazy. It was extremely painful. At that time, I thought my ears were bleeding. I was pressing my hands into my ears and yelling, but it was so loud, I couldn't even hear myself yell. I dropped back on my hands and knees and threw up on the floor until I was puking air. I looked up to see if this thing was coming after me, but I caught a last glimpse of it as it walked into a nearby room. The instant it disappeared around the corner, the ringing in my ears just stopped, like someone had hit the mute button. Needless to say, I ran the fuck out of there and didn't look back. I stayed away from the 4th floor for the next couple of months. I told a few people what I saw, but they only pretended to be interested. It was about 5 months after it happened when I decided to go back up there. I checked every room if there were any signs of this thing. They were long gone. I went to the window where it was standing and took a measurement. The top of the window was 10 foot 9 inches. I still have tinnitus. There have been a few times when I'm laying in bed at night and the ringing gets painful. I then freak out and check every room in my apartment. But it never gets as bad as it was that day. And I really hope it never does. Eric arrived promptly for duty at 6 p.m. He worked as a security guard for an upscale clothing store in the ritzy part of town. It was a pretty cushy gig. Aside from the occasional trust fund kid doing a line in the bathroom, or a sticky-fingered girl needing her purse turned out, his shift generally involved watching monitors for 12 hours. This was even more true of the night shift, since the store closed at 9 p.m. The lone guard watching the monitors through the night could sleep through half of his shift, and no one would be the wiser. The chumps that worked the parking lot patrols in the shopping complex thought it was boring. But to Eric, it was bliss. The normal store hours wound down just as they always did, with customers walking the aisles, inspecting the clothes, and making trips to and from the changing rooms. Eric shifted in his seat, wishing there were cameras in those changing rooms. There were quite a few top-quality trophy wives that shopped in this store after all. Of course, the changing rooms were off-limits for cameras due to privacy reasons, so Eric leaned back with a sigh and began poking at his smartphone to pass the time. Closing time came and went, and the monitors now showed empty aisles and abandoned cashier stations. The store was a darkened temple to consumerism, and Eric was the lone attendant priest. He passed the time, intermittently glancing at monitors and playing the latest hit mobile game, doing his best to stay awake despite the quiet and solitude. At around 12:30 a.m., some movement on camera number 9 caught his eye. Eric's eyes shifted from his phone to the screen, narrowing as they searched the CRT display. He saw nothing. Lowering his eyes back to the smartphone screen, he continued his imaginary conquests in his game. Another half hour passed before he saw movement again. He glanced up and then did a double take. He leaned forward in his seat, setting his phone on the counter and staring at the screen. There was someone standing in front of the clothing rack. The picture on the CRT was grainy, but judging by the length of the hair and the haggard appearance of the clothes, it appeared to be a woman. Perhaps it was a vagrant of some kind. This was a hassle Eric did not need. Eric stood from his chair. As he did, the figure's head inclined. It appeared to be looking in the direction of the camera, but the resolution made it impossible to tell for sure. Slowly, the figure turned and walked towards the changing rooms. Shit, Eric thought, moving quickly towards the door. He didn't want to play hide and seek with the homeless at 1 a.m. Grabbing his flashlight, baton, and his keys, he left the guard station. He turned, locking the door behind him, before walking out into the store's showroom floor. The eerily silent store spread before him as he made his way through the racks towards the changing rooms. Each stand seemed to loom larger in the shadows, and Eric moved carefully to ensure that each one was just that, a shadow. As he passed through women's wear, he glanced up at the wall. There was a model there, clad in only bikini-style underwear. He smiled up at the attractive woman as he walked, then felt himself bump into a large humanoid figure. Suppressing a shout, he simultaneously shoved and scooted backwards, creating distance in order to draw his baton. He peered meaningfully at the fallen figure. A mannequin. Eric cursed under his breath, sheathing his weapon. He bent down and sat the mannequin back upright, shamelessly copping a feel before straightening the blouse that it wore. A soft thumping sound brought him out of his reverie and back to the task at hand. Resolutely, he strode the remaining distance to the changing rooms directly, intent on confronting the intruder and getting this whole thing over with. The changing room was illuminated only by the emergency exit lights. 4 faux oak stalls sat in front of him, with their doors shut. Eric called out, but there was no answer. He spoke again, more loudly, demanding the intruder come out. Still no answer, except for the hum of the HVAC. Finally, Eric stated he was coming in, and that they'd better make themselves known, quick. Once again, there was no response. Eric positioned himself outside the room on the far left. He placed a hand on the handle and turned slowly. The cool metal turned without a sound, as did the door on its well-maintained hinges. Eric clicked on his flashlight, and upon shoving the door open, stepped back and inspected the stall. It was empty. 3 more to go. Eric moved to the second stall, apprehension rising like bile in the back of his throat. He grabbed hold of the handle, firmer than before, and gave the door a firm shove in. Again, the changing stall was empty. Despite himself, he began to sweat. Only 2 stalls remained. He took a few deep breaths. This was not a big deal. After all, he'd kicked out unwanted people before. Besides, if the person was violent or wouldn't leave, Eric could just call the cops. With those thoughts, he pushed the nervousness down, clasped the handle of the stall, and opened it. Empty. Hairs prickled on the back of Eric's neck as he stared at the one remaining stall. Fear surging back to the front of his mind. They were in there. They had to be. He called out to them, telling them to come out now, or he was coming in. He received no response. He listened closely, but could hear no breathing. There was no smell either. Given their haggard appearance, he expected a nasty stench. But instead, there was nothing but the high-end citrus cinnamon smell of the wall-mounted deodorizers. He should have been relieved. But the disparity just unnerved him more. He steeled himself to open the door. It was time to turn this person out on the street. This had ruined his evening, and as he thought about it, Eric actually began to get angry. What a hassle, a headache, an annoyance. He resolved that he might even be a bit rough with the intruder if he had to, just to teach them a lesson. Hands, now shaking with fear and anticipation, he drew his baton back, and rather than turning the handle, he kicked the door in violently. What he saw there caused his stomach to drop into his shoes. Nothing. There was no one there. Enough was enough. Eric wasn't going to play this game. He put away his baton and reached for his smartphone to call the police, but then realized it wasn't there. He then remembered that he had set it down in the guard station room earlier. Eric began to walk back to the guard station, regularly looking about and over his shoulder for any sign of the intruder. When he reached the locked guardroom door, he fumbled out his keys and shakily undid the lock. Once the mechanism clicked open, he briefly glanced over his shoulder. Nothing there, then hastily entered the station and locked the door behind him. He sat down at the console in front of the screens, rewinding the footage on all the monitors. He reached the point at which the mystery person appeared. He watched them walk into the changing rooms as he dialed the local police precinct contact number. As the phone rang, he then saw himself appear on the monitors. A woman answered the phone, asking how to direct his call. Eric asked to be transferred to the on-watch officer for his area of town. As he waited, he watched the tape, and he saw his past self stumble into the mannequin before moving into the changing rooms. As he watched his past self on camera number 9, a flicker of movement appeared on camera number 5. This camera was displaying the outside of the guard station door. He turned to look. It was the haggard woman. He was sure of that now from this new view, who had now appeared on camera number 5's display, just as he was walking into the changing stations. Where had she come from? He watched, his heart speeding up, as the figure walked towards the door. He had locked it. Eric knew he had locked it. As the figure reached the guard door, the screen immediately flicked off. Behind him, Eric could hear a slow creaking sound. He watched in terror, as in the reflection from the surface of Camera 5's dead monitor, the storage closet behind him began to open. Hello? Area 425 Precinct? How can I help you? Hello? Anyone there? Hello? I've never really been a fan of getting my picture taken. When I was younger, I had only gotten my picture taken twice for family photos. My family wasn't well off enough to afford them every year, so we did it once when I was a baby and once during my adolescent years. After that, the process of getting my picture taken never really came up again. I did have to get it taken during school for yearbook photos, but I never really made an effort. I just sat down, gave the camera a blank look, and moved on to class. By halfway through school, I had entered my emo goth phase. Everything was a drag, and the only thing that matched with black was, of course, more black. That was also around the time MySpace started putting its hooks into everyone. As much as I didn't care for it, my friends kept pestering me to join, so we could all keep in touch. I eventually caved, signed up, and posted a couple of photos of myself looking aloof, with a too cool to care attitude. Those became my eternal photos until I graduated. By the time high school ended, my desire to keep up with social media had dwindled. MySpace was on the decline, Facebook was rising, and I had no interest in starting over again. I deleted my account and moved on. Between high school and college, I got a part-time job to pay what little bills I had. Ironically, I ended up working at a photo processing business. Most of my time was spent printing other people's pictures. A few months in, my boss decided we'd start offering our own photo services for passports and family events. My co-workers were excited. I couldn't have cared less. Eventually, the new equipment arrived, and part of the store was remodeled for photography. One day, while helping calibrate the camera, my co-worker asked me to stand in front of it. She told me to say cheese, and the flash went off. She frowned, disappointed, saying she wished that I had smiled. Confused, I told her I had. Just before the flash, I had forced a fake grin, but when I looked at the photo, My face was blank. Thinking maybe the shutter was too fast, I asked to try again. This time, I held my brightest, fake smile. However, the picture came out the same. Expressionless. She brushed it off and thanked me for helping, but it unsettled me. Everyone else's photos showed their smiles just fine, but not mine. Still, I ignored it and carried on. Years passed. I moved out, got into college, and eventually caved to my mother's constant nagging about finding someone. I signed up for a dating app, filled out the endless bio, and prepared to upload photos. That's when the problem resurfaced. I set my phone on a timer, posed with a warm, inviting smile, and waited for the flash. The picture showed me blank expression, no smile. I tried again, but I ended up getting the same result. Telling myself it must be the phone, I dug out an old digital camera my parents had given me. I set the timer, grinned brightly, and waited. The photo showed me expressionless. But this time, there was something else on the edge of the frame. A shadow. Confused, I tried again. The shadow was bigger. Another photo, my expression blank, but now my eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were staring off to the side, toward the shadow. The shape grew darker, swelling across the background and inside of it. I began to see the faint outline of a face. No features, just watching, empty. I shut the camera off and told myself I needed a break. That night, at around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The apartment was silent, but I felt like I wasn't alone. The corner of my room was darker than the rest. Within it, the swirling shadow, and in that shadow, the same face. Expressionless, just like mine in every photo. It pushed forward, trying to reach me. I felt myself sit up in bed, and then I woke again, drenched in sweat. The corner was empty. I don't know why my smiles never show up in pictures. Maybe it's nothing. But just to be safe, I don't think that I will be getting my photo taken ever again. A little over a month ago, my wife Sam received an urgent phone call from her mother. Apparently, her father had an accident at work and had suffered some injuries. Sam's father was an exceptionally large man who gave off an extremely intimidating aura. For most of his life, He had worked in steel processing plants. To me, he always seemed like the kind of guy who would say, "If you aren't getting your hands dirty, then are you even working?" According to her mother, one of the pallets of steel had buckled and come crashing down. Some smaller shards of metal flew and struck her father in the arm and leg. He had been taken to the hospital and was forced to remain there for a few days. Sam and I lived a few states away from her parents, so finding time to visit was challenging. We only barely managed to visit during the holidays, and sometimes not even then. However, the moment Sam heard her father had been injured, she immediately dropped everything and made travel arrangements. I wanted to go with her, but my work rarely gives me time off. Even during these trying times, they seem to operate under the mentality of, if you don't wish to work, we'll find someone who will. To say I was livid was an understatement, but I just bit my tongue and headed home. Sam assured me it would be fine and that I shouldn't worry myself. Still, I felt terrible as she left for the airport about a week after receiving the news. Meanwhile, all I could do was work and try my best not to worry. Sam did her best to update me throughout her travel. She arrived later in the evening and told me she had made it to her parents' house around midnight. Over the next few days, she kept me updated of her father's condition. The shards had been removed, and he was just spending time healing. He was scheduled to be discharged from the hospital after only a few days of observation. Meanwhile, Sam was doing her best to help her mother around the house while they waited for him to come home. During this time, my job seemed to pile on project after project. I could clearly see myself turning into some sort of workforce zombie. Before I knew it, nearly a week and a half had passed since Sam left. I checked my phone and looked at the calendar. She would be coming home the following day. She told me that since the flights were such short notice, she would be arriving very late in the evening. She said she would just grab a cab home and that I'd see her in the morning. I wanted to stay awake for her arrival, but as soon as I got home from work, I fell exhaustedly onto the bed. The next thing I knew, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. I cracked open my eyes, excited to see Sam sleeping next to me. But she wasn't there. I grabbed my phone to check for messages. Perhaps a flight had been delayed and she'd be arriving today or tomorrow instead. But I had received no new messages since the previous night. I got out of bed and was in the middle of sending her a text, asking if she was all right, when I was nearly startled out of my skin by someone standing in my kitchen. I turned on the light, and after a few seconds, I recognized Sam, holding a cup of coffee. I quickly walked over and embraced her, telling her how glad I was that she made it home safely. She returned a faint smile and set her mug down. I asked her what time she made it in, and she said only a couple of hours ago, but that she didn't want to disturb me while I slept. I thought this was odd, as she probably knew better than anyone how heavy a sleeper I am. She let out a soft sigh before telling me that she was starting to feel pretty tired herself. I told her once again that I was glad she was back, but I had to get ready for work. I quickly got changed and grabbed my bag. That's when I noticed another oddity. The mug she had set down was entirely spotless. It was as if no liquid had ever been poured into it. Normally, there should be some coffee stains inside. Perhaps she had just rinsed it out, I thought, and I continued out of the door. After a long day at work, I returned home in the evening. I felt as though I wasn't alone in the living room, though I didn't immediately see anyone. As my eyes drifted around, I noticed Sam sitting on the couch and staring at the TV. I asked her what she was doing. She just returned a faint smile and told me that she was watching the news. And when I glanced over at the black TV screen, I asked if she was feeling alright. She just shook her head, saying she was fine. I was far too exhausted to press further. I told her I would jump in the shower and then head to bed early. She said she'd come to bed later. As I headed down the hallway, I glanced back at Sam, who seemed to resume watching the black TV screen. I took a very long shower, and when I finished, I opened the door to the bathroom. I nearly jumped back at the sight of Sam standing mere inches away. I asked her, exasperated, what she was doing. She just smiled and said she had to use the bathroom. Clutching my chest, I told her she should have just knocked. She chalked it up to forgetfulness. After trading positions with her, I got changed and climbed into bed. I couldn't help but wonder if something had happened to her while visiting her parents. She had been acting strange ever since returning home. I tried to rationalize it as exhaustion from travel, or perhaps the stress of dealing with her father. The next couple of days passed, filled with more strange behavior from Sam. I'd find her staring off into space, or lingering in odd places throughout the house. One day, I found her standing in the closet, as if deciding what to wear, but she had been there for an extended time. However, the creepiest thing happened one night around 3 a.m. I had been startled awake by a noise. Sam wasn't in bed. I called out to her, but received no response. I searched the house, checking every room, but I was coming up empty-handed. A pang of worry formed in my stomach as I absent-mindedly glanced out of the window. Someone was standing in the backyard. As I drew closer, I realized it was Sam, standing in the center of the yard. She was looking up at the sky and muttering something. I rushed to her and asked what she was doing. She almost snapped to her senses, telling me she was just talking to herself. I quietly guided her back inside and got her to bed. Right up until I drifted off, I worried something was seriously wrong with her and considered calling a professional for help. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I entered the kitchen and saw Sam standing next to the window, staring out at the backyard. I asked if she was all right. She just nodded. Just before leaving, I realized I had forgotten my phone on the nightstand. I rushed back to get it and noticed a missed call. When I checked the voicemail, I learnt it was from the hospital, calling about my wife. Naturally confused, I called back and asked about Sam. They informed me that she had been in an accident and hospitalized for the past week. I was beyond confused and insisted there must be a mistake. They transferred me to Sam's hospital room, where I heard her voice over the receiver. A cold sweat broke out across my body. She explained that she had been in a car accident on the way home from the airport. She didn't remember much, aside from landing and hailing a cab. I asked her why I hadn't been contacted sooner. She told me that her purse and phone, with all of her identification, had gone missing during the accident. She had been in and out of consciousness for most of the week. That's when I felt my pulse quicken as she told me something else. Someone had appeared on the dark road. The cab driver swerved to avoid them and crashed into a ditch. She could feel herself fading in and out of consciousness, but right before, she watched as a figure stood over her. She described it as resembling an alien. Smooth grey skin with a wet-like appearance, a nearly featureless face with two small slits for eyes, and pinpoints for nostrils. She stifled a slight chuckle, calling it a product of her accident. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was bone dry. She told me the doctors were clearing her for release the next day, and that I could pick her up. I apologized for not being at her side, but she said it wasn't my fault. I had no way of knowing where she was. She said she needed rest, but was excited to see me tomorrow. I agreed and hung up, gripping the phone tightly, trying to stop my body from shaking. If Sam was in the hospital, then who had been in my living room? I opened the bedroom door and walked down the hallway. A cool breeze brushed against me as I noticed the living room window was open. The same window where the Sam who had been here all week had been standing. I don't know who or what had been impersonating my wife, but I just hope to God that it never comes back.